all the work that is being done in Boulder County. So with that preface, what we're doing today is we're going to be sharing a little bit more of updates on new settlements that are coming. The good news is that more money is coming. Give you a little bit of updates about timelines, our 2023 Opioid Abatement Conference, and then provide some time for questions as well. Also, a shout out just to Kelly, Jim Adamsberger, and other staff that have been doing excellent work and connecting with our office whenever is needed. First, I wanted to introduce not only myself, but our program assistant, Jack Patterson. He's the front lines for our opioids at COAG email and is a great asset. Jack, if you just want to introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Jack Patterson. I am joined the AG's team midway through last year, and so provide a lot of the operations and logistics support to the team. And so happy to always connect with other regions and resources, and if I don't know answers, I can get you to the people who usually can answer those questions. So you can reach us at opioids@coag.gov if you ever need anything. Thank you for inviting us to speak today.
Great. And so this is our full team, including a part-time rural outreach specialist, and then our director, Heidi Williams, who you've already worked with. Just to give you a high-level overview of some of the priorities that we're working on this year, we are doing more around regional support. We have a regional learning forum that we have regions attending. Boulder has always been participating and sharing best practices, which we've really appreciated, sharing out about braiding or leveraging funds. And then we do have an opioid and fentanyl prevention campaign that was just made into contract. So that will be forthcoming within this year and through next year. We will have some innovation grants launched in probably around May or June of this year. So keep your eyes open for that from our office. And then the main update we wanted to give is that we're now over $720 million over the 18 years for the opioid crisis. There have been 5 new recent settlements. Those include CVS, Walmart, Teva, Walgreens, and Allergan. And those were not included in the original numbers that you received. So this updated figure shows the full amount over the 18 years that is expected to Colorado. Several of these are already in the coffer. So McKinsey was the first one. We also have the Amerisource, Bergen, Johnson & Johnson, Cardinal Health, McKesson. That's that 385 that is noted in your figures. But really these additional ones, CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, Teva, Allergan, are not yet noted in your total figures. So we will see you'll see a pretty large increase in the amount of funds that will be coming to Boulder County. Once those numbers are finalized, we will provide them to you, and then we'll also provide them on our dashboard, which is the opioid settlement dashboard. I invite you to look at it now. Jack will put it in the chat, and you can see what is allocated currently for Boulder County, the region 6, and then also for your local participating local governments. So the reason we wanted to come to you all is because with these new settlements, it will be required that we reach out to participating local governments again and get some signatures from all the participating local governments. They may have already received, a very brief email from Rubris. Our office will actually be working to gather all the signatures. So there will be one signature document required for each of these 5 settlements for each of the participating local governments. It's really helpful to have your support as the region to help us corral and get all the folks to get those signatures in time. Our due date is April 7th. And we will be sending out this email probably later this week or early next week with information to all the participating local governments, and we'll let the regions know as well. So that is our main highlight. Any questions about that? And we did just wanted to inform you before we started sending out these emails to your participating local governments.
I don't see any hands raised, so I think you're good to continue.
Okay, great. So really, we're very hopeful about this increase in funds. It will go through the same distribution model that we've done all the other funds. And so 60% will go directly to the regions, 20% will go to the participating local governments, and the local governments will make that determination if they want to give it to the region. For these, it will just, go with their already opt-out, opt-in determination, and they'll have an opportunity annually to make a change. But by default, it will go by what they've already determined. And I think for most of you, I think all of them, they have determined to go to the region. So that will continue. And then just as a reminder, there's 10% that goes to an infrastructure fund. We released a grant for that in November and are in the process of scoring applications, and recipients should know in spring whether they were awarded. And then there's only 10% that goes to the state government, and that requires full transparency with the funds that are used on our dashboard. I'm not going to go into this in depth. You all know about the approved purposes and have been following that very closely. Just as a reminder, these are some of the allowable uses that opioid settlement funds can be used for. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us or our office. And then just a reminder, we wanted folks to know about other funding opportunities. One large one is from the Behavioral Health Administration. There were ARPA funds that are pretty sizable. One is a community investment grant that covers a wide range of substance use and mental health. And those funds need to be used by December 2024. I think they can be allocated through 2026. But that's a great source of funding that you can complement with the opioid settlement funds. On August 16th to 18th, there's going to be our conference in Montrose. If you're thinking of summer plans or where to go, think about Montrose. There's beautiful places to visit. We're hoping to have maybe 2 to 3 representatives from each opioid settlement region. I know Boulder's contributions were very valuable in the past. People have definitely asked a lot about how do you incorporate the voice of lived experience. And I know Boulder's really been a leader in that area. And so we'd love to have at least 1 representative, but hopefully maybe 2 to 3 representatives attend that conference. And we'll keep you posted with more information. Here are some timeline information that the regions will be aware of. You have already submitted your plan, and so the funding request went through. For others, there's an opportunity to continue that through March 15th. That's the last funding request. If you do have any changes, you could also submit those. If you have any funding amendment changes, you could also submit that March 15th. We do know that people might not be able to spend the full amount that they allocated, and that is fine. Just let our office know, and we will make that amendment. In September 15th is when the annual expenditure reporting will be due, as well as your plan certification. And then September 15th will be the funding request for the subsequent year. Before September 15th, we'll be providing you those updated numbers. We're hoping at least by spring, we'll have those numbers so that you can have a more accurate assessment for what to use for your year 2 funding. And then ongoing is technical assistance. We'll soon be working on some outcome data reporting through the Colorado MOU. It's required that we work with local governments in that determination. So we'll be reaching out to you all, CCI, CML, and then Boulder County specifically as well. Are there any questions about the timeline? Nope.
I don't see any questions. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Well, great. I am a huge fan and proponent of Boulder County and the work that you do. I know I see many folks, Robin, Susan Caskey, I know have been doing, Commissioner Levy, been doing this work for many years, Jim Adamsberger, Curtis. So I know you guys all have the resources to do this well, and we just want to be a support however is needed. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time with questions, and then we'll be following up with an email in the coming week around the outreach for those new settlements, the 5 new settlements, and trying to get your local governments to get the signatures if they would want to participate. I see a hand raised from Robin.
Thank you, Jamie. I was wondering if there are any trends or observations you have from a statewide approach in terms of what you're seeing from other regional councils that might be helpful for us to hear about. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if there are any highlights or particular things that you've noticed that would be informative to us, I think that would be helpful. Yeah, definitely. So there are 19 regions. I didn't put the map up. So there's quite a few, and there's a quite large variation in how all the regions are
doing this work. That is one of the determinations with this Colorado MOU is it's really local control. So you'll see a lot of variation. I know Kelly and Jim have been very consistent on sitting on those regional councils. One of the last conversations was around financial mechanisms or funding mechanisms. And so I think regions are grappling with how are they going to allocate this money to recipients. You know, is it going to be a direct allocation? Is it going to be an RFP? Is it a very open RFP? Is it a more narrow RFP? So we're seeing variation in that. Another area is around some of the financial management. There's one region that is using a vendor or contractor to help manage some of the grants. So I think depending on, you know, how rural a community is, they might just not have the infrastructure in place to do some of this work. But there is a piece called regional planning that is allowable for usage of funds. And I know Boulder is considering that. If you do need the infrastructure support to do some of this work, that is an allowable opioid use expenditure. So that's something we're seeing kind of across the board, is that people might need to allocate some money to just doing the work versus direct services, and that's completely allowable. That's one trend. And then I think some other ones is just the focus areas. We're seeing a lot, you know, with prevention, harm reduction. Those are some areas that we're seeing some work in. Community involvement, trying to connect with existing community health assessment plans is one area, so that you're not completely starting new, but really trying to integrate with existing efforts. Doing the braided funding, knowing that this is 18 years, but it might not be as much money. So making sure that it's braiding with other resources, and then getting the community involved, which I think actually Boulder is kind of a leader in that area. I think there's some trends that we're seeing. Another area is just making sure that you have Medicaid, if that whatever money you're using isn't something that can be reimbursable from Medicaid, because you know, these are only limited funds. And I think there are a lot of best practices out there too. So if you're having questions, I know Kelly and Jim are really connected to us, but there are a ton of reports out there about how to best use these funds, and we're happy to provide that as well. But I think you guys are right on track, really have been excellent partners. And I think your model of having an operational work group has been kind of a unique example about how to keep members engaged that maybe aren't specifically on the regional council.
Great, thank you, very helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Jamie or Jack before we move on? And I don't see any hands up. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. You're welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting, although we won't be offended if you need to get off and get on to other things on your calendar. So the next thing we have on the agenda is an update on the contracting process for the first round of funding and the status of those settlement funds. So who is leading us in that?
I will be taking over from here, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen.
Great, thank you, Kelly.
Absolutely. All right, excuse me while we toggle here. All right, so I am just gonna quickly go through some of these opening slides. We had a recap of the agenda, which Claire read out for us earlier before the AG's presentation, and then kind of move through the AG's slides here. So excuse this sort of behind the scenes movement. But so jumping in for fund distribution updates. So this is just a bit of a snapshot of where we are in terms of getting those dollars from the Office of Financial Management to the 25 recipient agencies. So as a reminder, we did approve, or the council approved in our December meeting, to fund the initial 25 programs, the shovel-ready programs that were put forward via the recommendations of our Opioid Advisory Council, our Opioid Operations Group. And they totaled $1.8 million. And so currently where that work sits is in a state of contracting. So what that contracting looks like is going to be a little bit different based on the relationship between Boulder County Community Services and the receiving program. So if it is another county program, we'll be doing an IGA. If it is not a county program, we're looking into other contracting or funding agreements to see which are the most feasible to pair up and exchange those funds. So in service of getting these contracts complete with the 25 shovel-ready programs, we have asked each of the programs to submit a scope of work and a budget, a year-long or an annual budget for how they plan to utilize the funds. And those are just sort of the baseline necessary documentation that needs to come into community services in order to trigger that contracting agreement to go out. So by way of other update, the settlement status, we have received word that payment transfer has initiated by the national administrator into Boulder County, which is to say we are in the process of finally receiving our funds. And so that's great news, all the more within our timeline in terms of getting these contracts and these funds out the doors to those 25 programs. And the final thing that we are just working on internally is determining our fund distribution frequency and structure. So you heard Jamie mention that many of the regions are sort of grappling with what's the structure look like. Do we want to do upfront payments on a quarterly basis? Do we want to do something that's more cost reimbursement, some sort of hybrid in terms of, monthly, what am I trying to say, distribution and then an expense report. So what is that structure going to look like? That's really what we're still sort of grappling with in the meantime as we continue to execute these contracts. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions or comments about this process, kind of the logistics of fund distribution.
If there are questions, just go ahead and speak up. I don't have everybody visible on my screen here. Okay, I actually did have a question, Kelly.
Sure.
Well, you probably answered it in your presentation, but we were discussing just the three commissioners about the programs that we've approved for this initial $1.8 million. Will that ever have to come through the county commissioners for approval on a business agenda, or is this is a totally separate process, and the council, this council right here, it just makes those decisions independently?
It's my understanding that's all decided via this council. It's a separate process. I do believe that the 25 programs, because they don't meet the threshold to as a contract to be approved in front of the commissioners, that it does not need to go through them. However, I'm going to actually defer to Robin on that and make sure I'm not saying misinformation.
Yeah, I think we have to follow the county's purchasing policies, Claire. And so I think, Kelly, you're right that approval policy would be based on the amount of the contract, whether or not they would go to a formal business meeting rather than being signed off by Jana.
Okay. Yeah, I think the question came up a little bit in the context of knowing what we have approved for this first round of funding, and I was going back through our agendas, and I don't think I have a document that represents that. I did share the agenda and all the materials in the agenda, so that I think my fellow commissioners were hoping to get something in front of them on this. So that it's fine. It doesn't have to go through in accordance with our policies, but I did want to just share what the decisions we've made here.
And to your, oh, go ahead, Robin, sorry.
We can make sure that you have, that one document with the amounts. And if the commissioners would like a public meeting to put more sunshine on the work that we're doing, I think we could do that. That's just a public meeting where we're giving information to you, as opposed to a public hearing or a business meeting. We could certainly schedule that, Claire.
Sure. Let me check. I think that might be really valuable.
Great. Any other questions, comments on the distribution process? All right.
All right, thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually gonna just keep cruising into the next portion too, if that's okay. So in terms of moving ahead, this is the next item on our agenda. And so this was sort of queued up in our December meeting. However, we did run short on time. So this will start with a bit of a recap of where we left off in December, but really this is to give the council an understanding of a pivot that we're sort of creating both in our operations group and will be reflected in discussions in this council space as well, which is to say we are really moving away from that initial shovel-ready approach of programs that are already standing, and instead doing a broader strategic planning process to make sure that we're really calling into our longer-term vision what we are going to be funding moving forward across the 18 years. So I want to start with the feedback that we have already received from our operations group. And again, this is something we queued up in December, so apologies if this is a little bit redundant, but in the December 12th meeting of the opioid operations group, we asked the question, what are the principles that we want to carry forward in developing our strategic priorities? And this is a snapshot, the themes that kind of came forward in that discussion. So the first is have a broader community planning approach. And so we've said many times, both in the operations group and the council, that we had a bit of a shorter lead time, and it really led us in this direction of having that shovel-ready approach. But there were opportunities, or there should be more opportunities, to engage the community, create community feedback loops. So just have an approach that really calls in the community to the process a little bit more. Establish language around evidence-based services. So this one really came up as we started to parse out, what are the programs that are already standing versus the programs that we originally called aspirational, which is to say not quite standing, but really up and coming sort of interventions. And we really wanted to make sure that we held the value of looking at evidence-based services or evidence-supported services, however, not doing so to the detriment of excluding any up-and-coming programs that might be innovative but might not yet have had the backing or the research to really sort of stamp that evidence-based title onto them. So just being, mindful of our use of that terminology. Support prevention and early intervention. This is something that's come up in both this group and our operations group as something that we want to really have as a top priority, which is, let's make sure that we're funding early intervention and prevention to sort of abate the downstream costs of higher interventions in other more costly systems like criminal justice system. Be as collaborative as possible with other similar efforts. You heard Jamie speak to this a little bit in terms of what are some of the best practices. Some regions are looking at their community health needs assessments that are currently underway, or other strategic plans that are currently underway, and being very intentional to fold those efforts in. And so we've heard loud and clear, let's do the same. We know we have a behavioral health team that's doing a lot of engagement and focus groups around planning for the behavioral health roadmap. And so how do we be really conscious to fold those discussions together so we're not engaging the same folks around really similar conversations? Know the communities and populations that are most impacted. So look at the data, know the policies, know the structures that have left certain communities or populations unduly impacted by the opioid crisis, and make sure that you're including their voices in the process to any extent possible. Implement an anti-stigma approach that spans all strategies. So we heard from members of our operations group that really any intervention is sort of made or broken in terms of engagement on whether or not it really stigmatizes people or has an anti-stigma approach in opposite. So have a transparent decision-making process and communication loop back to the public. A little bit more of that first one, which is just, we had a speedy process in this first go. Let's sort of slow down, be intentional, involve others, and be really transparent about what this all looks like. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any questions or comments about some of this initial feedback that came from the operations group. I see a hand up. Susan.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Appreciate this and all the feedback and all the work that the operations group is doing. So I just I think there's so many areas of work across the county that we talk about a broader community planning approach, just to have something more comprehensive, and know that so often grants and funding kind of drive the timelines, and it becomes a really heavy lift. I'm just curious if you all have talked about what in more detail what that could look like, or what would be involved in supporting that, or how can we support that?
So in terms of the funding timeline, we do know that we get our annual funding drop every September. And so in service of developing our strategic priorities, and as part of that, determining whether or not we wanted to do something like an RFP approach, or what that typical grant process might look like compared to our process of fund distribution. We're going to be talking a little bit later in this conversation, or in this meeting, about potential use of an external evaluating agency or facilitating agency to really help us stay within that timeline, and really have some sort of cohesive plan and process in place by that next funding drop in September. And I don't know if Jim or Robin, you have anything else to add to that?
I appreciate that. Sorry, Jim. I appreciate that. I just wanted to make, maybe my question wasn't clear. I think just the lift of more of this comprehensive community planning approach has been hard. And I hear you on kind of the consultant. So would the consultant help bring in community members in a different way and community partners in a different way to really try to get a grasp on the different siloed efforts that are happening around trying to support kind of substance use treatment and prevention and those kind of things? Is that kind of what you were speaking to, Kelly?
Yeah, apologies.
Okay.
So yeah, that is exactly part of the scope of work for an external agency to sort of assist with. Okay. That's kind of some of the feedback that we've gotten from our operations group as well, is, be really creative about how we're engaging the community and be conscious of the work that's already happening and how to fold it in. So yeah.
Great. And then the only other thing I would say is, I mean, again, I get a little concerned about some of the silo efforts, knowing that substance use and mental health are so interrelated. And with all of the work around the BHA happening and other efforts around mental health, just, how is there an opportunity here to weave any of that in? And I get that when we do that, it can take longer, it can kind of water down some of the efforts or recommendations, but that would be my only other maybe a request to explore where are the intersections there and where can we make sure that we're not siloing stuff too much.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. I think we as staff are really conscious of pulling that collaboration forward. So we know that Marcy Campbell is leading some conversations with folks in the harm reduction space in service of that behavioral health planning. Similarly, Lisa Moreno is doing some with experts in the recovery field. And so internally as staff, we're being really collaborative to kind of offload what's going on in each of our respective groups and sort of get an understanding of where are the most meaningful intersections to really come together more formally. And I see a couple hands up, so I'm going to stop babbling and see if, I'm not sure whose hand went up next.
Lexi, I think you were next.
Thanks. Just to kind of chime in on Susan's point, I think that the ability, the wonderful moment that we have right now to make sure that the work of the opioid settlement is represented really clearly in our regional MBH plan, I think is a terrific opportunity. And I love the points about how do we ensure a community engaged approach in the opioids work. And I would just say that it feels like there is kind of this moment happening of an opportunity for us to really de-silo some of these efforts and make sure that they're connected. So I just wanted to reinforce that. And I really appreciate the fact that you're already paying attention to it. And thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to underline what Kelly said. So we have a pretty thorough community engagement process for the behavioral health roadmap. And recently, groups of like 20 people who are in recovery. We had a large harm reduction group. there's an upcoming, or maybe it happened last week, group around meth, as well as substance abuse treatment. So that will inform not only the behavioral health roadmap, but that data will come to Kelly as well and the ops board to inform that planning work. And we can certainly, when those focus group and stakeholder groups, you know, when we have the analysis from those groups, we can also bring that information to this group because it's pretty interesting. And many of the groups that have already met have indicated an interest in continuing to meet, as even though it's siloed, it's their specific issue. And they felt like there's never really been a vehicle where they can come together with a shared voice and have these conversations. So I think that's a really nice benefit of the process that we're doing that maybe was unanticipated. So I just wanted to name that that's happening as well.
Other questions or thoughts?
I was just going to comment that I think it's really smart how you all are kind of taking your time to think this through. I know there's the pressure to spend the money quickly, but it is over 18 years. So I just want to congratulate you all for being thoughtful and trying to think through how to avoid silos and bringing in potentially an outside facilitator if that's what's needed to make sure that this is kind of a long range plan, because it is 18 years. There is a bit more flexibility, I would say, than say something like a federal grant. And so I think the intention is not to try to make this a new, very separate entity, but to help support existing efforts. So I think you guys are on a great track. And I appreciate all the thoughtfulness.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay, it's going to move us forward here. If my slides advance for me. All right, so that last piece on the last slide in terms of designing a transparent methodology for funding, this is a piece that I wanted to break down a little bit more and hear thoughts from council members. So, the sort of sub-bulleted items there are the pieces that we know are going to be kind of the larger bodies of work that may fold into this transparent methodology. So we've already talked at length about the creation of our strategic priorities as a region and what that work might look like in terms of collaboration and engagement. This might involve community engagement events. We know that we want to increase representation in our operations group. We've already heard loud and clear more folks from school districts and other communities. So we're sort of tackling that item as well. Developing an application process, timelines, and even an appeals process. So, what is this going to look like? Are we going to do RFPs? If so, what are the timelines for those RFPs? What's the approval process? Where do we house that information in a transparent way? So all of that work sort of folded into this transparent methodology development. Question for the council is really, where and how and to what extent does the council want to be really involved in some of these bodies of work or decisions versus where is their comfort sort of delegating some of this to either staff, the operations group, a facilitator, or some combination thereof? So I'll just pause and see if folks have thoughts on that delegation process.
I can jump in for a quick, some quick feedback. I mean, I think the operations team has been really tremendous and really brings sort of the firsthand subject matter expertise to the fore and really have appreciated that. I myself don't necessarily need or feel like I don't need to be involved in the timelines, the appeals process, the application process. I don't need to create the RFPs. I do think that there's something about making sure that we're aligned in the strategic priorities. And I do think that should be something that comes to the council. But I certainly, the day-to-day administration, I'm really comfortable with the operations team and how they've been handling this so far.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I agree. I would see the ROC's primary role in kind of guiding those strategic priorities, but also really trust the staff and the operations group, and like the idea of opening the operations group up a little bit more to some of the key partners. And also really like the idea of supporting completion of RFPs that maybe community organizations want to pursue. We know that that can often be a barrier for them. And we have a chance, I think, to model a different way, a different relationship between government and community in relation to not just supporting inclusion, but really providing resource supports and capacity supports. So I think that's terrific.
Any other thoughts on the council and overlap and delegation process between the council and the operations group?
I think from my perspective, I'd like to stay high level, but really understand community and organizational impact in terms of things that are being brought forward, because our communities are all different. And I think being able to have the conversation at 30,000 feet is where we probably need to stay. But being connected enough to where if we see something that may have an impact to our organizations and our community in a way that we're not seeing, we can engage, but not being in the details.
Thanks, Harold.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with that. You know, we came together because we're managing these funds and really wanting to impact our community with these new resources. And I'm curious if the ROC board is interested in, similar to what Harold said, being a broader container for conversations that may not be about funding, but may be about emerging issues. Or here's what we're noticing that's happening in law enforcement, and doing some problem solving around that might lead to a direction or a pathway to a new program or funding, but it might not. It might be, oh, we need to look at our local rules, or we need to advocate with the state about something. So we hadn't really talked about the role of the ROC in that broader regard, and if there's appetite for that, because if we continue to meet monthly, we're not going to be looking at funding things every month, right? There's going to be other topical things that we could use this time for, to either, again, bring forth what we're hearing from the community, or bring forth new ideas or new data or whatever. But I know in the past, when we've had these governance structures, it's really been helpful to have community leaders engaged in a community issue that's more than just about an RFP and funding. So I just posed that question for the group.
Quiet group this morning. Kelly, are you getting the feedback that you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just, this is super helpful. I think it's a curiosity in the operations group as well, in terms of, you know, when we kind of move forward and when we hit decision points, just kind of making sure that we're plugging into the advice and the approval of this council as well. And so it's just good to hear that some of the operational stuff and day-to-day decisions, there's comfort in keeping that delegated in the operations group, and then more of the broader strategic planning and checking in against that plan would come to this group. So that's super helpful.
Lexi's got her hand up.
Thanks, Commissioner Levy. Just a follow-up and clarification, Robin, are you proposing or suggesting that this monthly meeting also be used as a time for hearing from community, that we're kind of talking about maybe, you know, not all of the meetings, they're not just talking about funding, but they're also not just us kind of internally talking, but that the format could open up a bit? Did I hear that right? Sorry, I'm just looking for clarification.
Yeah, I don't have a recommendation on the table. Lexi, it was more about the role of this group rather than community engagement during these meetings. I think, Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is an opportunity for community advisory and input in our process in other ways. But that being said, Lexi, you know, certainly everyone here represents a constituency and more. So each one of us could bring forth what we're hearing from the community for these meetings. But again, I didn't have that detail figured out. It was more of a question, is our role bigger than just approving funding? Harold, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I guess more of it's a question / state. Are you really talking about how programs that are coming out of this, you know, when we look at what are the potential unintended consequences in our respective communities, having that conversation to say, oh, here's the problem we're seeing. If you're doing this, it's exacerbating this problem in our community, and here's why? Or are you just saying bringing completely different issues forward?
I think they should be related to the opioid epidemic.
Okay.
I was raising a broad question without a specific recommendation. I think if there's any unintended consequence that's happening for an individual community or sector, this group should know about it, absolutely. And there may be an unintended silver lining or benefit that someone could bring forward that another community might go, oh, well, that's a great idea for our community as well. And again, I'm sorry if I'm not articulating the thought very well, but I just want to make sure that we know. I guess I want to know if the board is open to having, like, we only exist for funding approval. And this is a space where we can come for a broader conversation. That was all. What that looks like, I don't have figured out. Anjali, I see your hand up.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to respond to your question because I think if I understand you correctly, part of what you're saying is this is an opportunity for us to engage in a conversation that has a tremendous impact across our community. And it has an impact related to moving services away from being siloed to really addressing this issue from a pretty broad perspective. And I would love to engage in that level of conversation and not just be a funding approval body.
And I apologize, I'm going to jump in because I've got to jump out and attend another meeting, but I just wanted to echo that. I think if we have conversations that could both create awareness and educate and actually inform some of the funding decisions, then this would be a really terrific place to have those. And so I just think that I would be certainly open and supportive of that, however that may look. And apologies that I must leave the meeting.
Thanks, Nuria.
Any final thoughts or questions, comments?
Kelly, maybe these initial thoughts could go back to the ops group.
Yeah, absolutely.
To get some ideas about what that might look like and how that might inform our agendas for the ROC group.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think one other thing that's sort of popping up for me, which is a great segue, is to what extent, if we did move with a independent facilitating agency, they might be able to kind of lend more capacity to kind of this notion of bringing it all together in a broader plan. So That's great. Thanks, Robin. So that said, final update is that we have recently released an RFP, or a request for participation, request for proposal, excuse me, for an external agency that would guide us in, or assist us in two ways. One is really, adding facilitation and capacity to the planning process of our opioid operations group. And the other is to develop and implement a long-term evaluation plan to really look at the effectiveness of any of the investments that we are making and any of the impacts of the programs that we fund against those stated strategic priorities. So this proposal was released in early February. It is due at the end of the month. And just wanted to give the council sort of a snapshot of what we're asking for in that RFP. We've asked respondents to speak to their expertise with different implementation approaches and large group processes. We've asked them to respond to experience in facilitation of community events, processes, specifically around complex subject matter. We've asked how they in the past have reflected a lens of equity in their facilitation processes, in their engagement processes, their planning, and any recommendations or outputs that have come out of their work in the past. We've asked with their expertise on measurement of outcomes across the complex social issues and implementation strategies, including, again, that lens on equity outcomes and equity-specific indicators. Ask them to respond to expertise in measuring individual programs versus measuring overall impact of strategies across. Staffing and ongoing management approaches. So this one's come up quite a bit. I think Jamie had mentioned this in the AG's update, but there is a monthly convening of all of the representatives from the various 19 settlement regions, and it's a learning forum. We just sort of share what's working, where our continued sort of barriers or challenges are to learn from each other. And a lot of what comes up in there is folks needing to get really creative about what the staffing and management of this looks like as the work continues to grow and as it sort of branches off into different areas of expertise, everything from strategic planning and development, community engagement, contracting, fiscal management. So it's becoming a broader approach that we want to make sure we're really conscious we're bringing in the right staff and adding capacity where necessary. So recommendations on that is another thing we asked for. And then finally, recommendations on appropriate use of data and how we can really approach impact data in a meaningful way to really sort of measure our strategies against, the impact that we'd like to see in our community. I'll pause and see if folks have questions about what we've asked for in this RFP.
Kelly, could you put the previous slide back up?
Yeah.
I just wanted to look at that second.
This one or the?
Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. All right. I'll keep moving unless there are other questions or comments about the RFP.
I think you're good.
All righty. So we did put forward this question to our operations group in our meeting on the 27th, and in terms of asking, what's a top priority for a facilitating agency to really assist us with. We kind of looked at this question against those principles that the group had already developed in our December conversation, which we just sort of spoke to. And this is the themes or the feedback that came out of that question. We'd really like an agency to help us with our transparent process and our process facilitation. So really the group said it would be great to just have a thought partner, an agency that's really sort of on the road with us, helping us plan, helping validate our processes and our ideas, helping us to really bring them into action or implement those ideas. We'd love an agency that could work to loop in non-traditional groups that hold expertise but aren't always folded into these types of conversations. I think the example that was given is faith-based communities or churches that see a lot of individuals and have a lot of expertise but aren't always really at the table in some of these conversations. Be more creative in the ways we involve community and gather community input. So I think it was stated, the county has a way that we tend to go about community engagement, and it works, and sometimes there's things that we could do a little bit better. So let's just be conscious of being more creative in our approach and not just kind of go through the motions or anything like that. a broad assessment of anti-stigma focused work that's currently happening. So this was, again, one of the principles that came forward from the operations group is you really have to focus on programs that are housed under that lens of anti-stigma. And so to do so, we really wanted to start by looking at the current programming out in the community and saying, what is focused on anti-stigma approach? What are they doing well? What could we really amplify? And where's the gap of programs that are working with individuals, but don't necessarily hold that anti-stigma approach? And then finally, they said it would be great to have more analysis of gaps across the full care continuum. So we've heard frequently in this group that recovery and recovery supports are a little, I don't want to say forgotten, but a little bit not at the front of the conversation always. And it is something that the group thinks is really important to kind of call forward as part of that broader care continuum, and to not forget any of the important sort of pieces on that continuum. So I'll stop and see if the group has other, if you were to answer the same question, what is a top priority for a facilitator to assist us with, or any general comments or feedback on the thoughts of the operations group. All right. And I know we do have that RFP available to share. It is due February 27th. So with that, I'm going to hand off. Oh, Lexi, I see your hand.
Sorry, Kelly, one more
Sure.
a note. Are you going to mention, and is there an intention to have the facilitator also be connected to the MBH regional plan or some of those other kind of ancillary projects that just connect really well with this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were just looking over the scope of, or the intended scope of this RFP yesterday. And one of the things that we did want to call forward was that we would have them collaborate with the staff, myself and others that are currently facilitating the operations group, and also call out that they would be working with other similar efforts that plug into this, like the behavioral health planning, community health needs assessment, to whatever extent possible. We do want that to be a priority for any agency that we choose.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Kelly, what's the RFP review process? Is that going to be just staff, or part staff, part ops board? Who's going to do that review and analysis? And
Absolutely. So what our current thinking is that it would be a subgroup of the operations group, so that let me think through this timeline that we had developed. So the application period closes the 27th. So in that first week of March, we were going to convene a small subcommittee of folks from the operations group that would be interested in looking through this. They would put forward sort of their finalists. So say the top 3 agencies that they really think sort of suit the feedback that the group gave previously about what we really want to see and how they could speak to our priority areas. And we would bring those finalists back to the March full operations group to say, here's what we sort of determined, and is there a formal recommendation from this group about selection of one of these agencies.
and would that recommendation come to this board?
That's a great question. I don't know. Would the board like to see that recommendation? I mean, I think that's definitely something that we can bring forward to this group.
I saw one thumbs up. Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Getting thumbs ups, okay. Yeah, that's great to know. Perfect in that whole delegation conversation too, so it's good to know.
Well, I think what I've heard the board members say, that there's a sweet spot in wanting to stay engaged and but not swoop in and do the work of staff, right? And so however we can keep the board in the know about some of these benchmarks and get input is great, recognizing that the staff has done the thorough process.
Gotcha. Super helpful, thank you. Any other questions, comments, or feedback on this RFP process? Right. So I'm actually going to hand it off to Robin for our last agenda item on the state infrastructure grant. And I can continue to drive, Robin, if you would like me to.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly.
Sure.
So, this was a topic that was on a past board agenda and we ran out of time. I think we introduced the opportunity and had a brief discussion about who might be interested in applying. And then we were going to circle back to the following meeting. The deadline for the first application came and went between our two meetings. So we didn't have a chance to really discuss the pros and cons of individual applications versus a regional application. So I just wanted to provide some space for that conversation, given that the next submission deadline is coming up in April. And Harold, I'd like to invite you to talk about the application. I believe you did put forth an individual application for the first submission deadline, which I think was January 15th. Do I have that right?
I think so, yes.
Do you want to share your process and what you applied for?
So kind of to go over what we were looking at. So we obviously operate the suites, which is a permanent supportive housing. And we were engaging with, I believe it was Element 2, and we had the 9% tax credits for another 55 units of permanent supportive housing adjacent to the suites. What we were finding as we were looking at the success of individuals in the suites was that addiction was becoming a significant issue for the residents of the community, both those that weren't addicted and those who were, and the challenges that it was creating for us under the federal guidelines that we have to maintain. And so we began having conversations with the Recovery Cafe, which is based in Longmont, and really talking about how we knew they were looking for space and trying to have a more permanent footprint in the community versus working out of a church, that they're currently in. And we knew that we had some space where we could bring them closer to those permanent supportive housing units, and we could develop a more consistent ongoing relationship with the residents of our community. And so in order to do that, we're looking at a ground lease for them and then trying to facilitate the capital cost. And so we put in for the capital cost so we could locate them in that area. It's also more centralized, adjacent to transit. And we think we can better serve the community with that partnership. So that's why we put that grant in, hoping that we could kickstart that project.
Great. Any questions for Harold about the project?
Yep. Fingers crossed.
So I think that's exactly the type of sort of shovel-ready project that was required given the timeline of the first submission. Harold and I exchanged a few emails, which I appreciated Harold's questions about, again, the role of the ROC, and is the ROC gonna, somehow have some authority around what our representative groups can and can't do. And my reply was that no, from my perspective, that wasn't the intention. And I know sometimes it's helpful to have a conversation about a regional approach or a collaborative approach for a project that might serve more than just one municipality or one sector. But we don't really have a process for that. And so I wanted again, I don't have a solution. I'm just raising the question. So would love to hear from board members about the role of the board, and do we want to think about more intentionally about the April deadline, or do we want to wait until next year and get a little more foundation under our feet before we do something new in terms of an infrastructure grant? So I'll just open the floor for that, for any comments people might have about that, as well as any questions for Harold about the project.
You know, Robin, one of the things that I was thinking about is I think we need to be flexible because we have our own needs within our own communities that, you know, I think this was very pointed in terms of where we were seeing success and where we weren't, what we needed to ensure that we could continue to house folks. That was probably very focused on what we were seeing in Longmont. There may be something that, you know, and where we need the flexibility is we may see something in our community just bringing up the conversation that we don't know whether or not other communities are experiencing similar issues. And it may be that as folks are bringing these ideas up, you know, we could all go, yeah, we're having this too, or we're having this, and we can work together. I think we just don't know. And I think if we have some clearinghouse to go, here's what we want to apply for and here's why. Others can then go, oh, you know what, we want to be part of this because we're struggling with the same issue. And so I would say flexibility to at least have a point where there's a bit of a clearinghouse in a conversation, just so we know what everyone's doing and we have the ability to come together if it fits our community needs.
Yeah, thank you for that, Harold. And I think that was related to the question I had about the board's role. Have it be more than just about the opioid settlement dollars. Elizabeth, I see your hand up. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Yes, Elizabeth Crow. I am not Nuria. She is not successfully cloned herself. So Deputy Director at City Boulder HHS. I would just echo what Harold said, that just that kind of not even really traffic cop, but just that clearinghouse approach so that we all know what municipalities are doing. At best, we'll be able to share ideas with each other. And if there are complementary strategies or activities for investment, that would be great. And I hope this wouldn't happen, but there could be an unintentional, you know, cross purposes situation, and we would just want to avoid that. We've had some conversations, Nuria and some HHS staff about that April deadline, and certainly no decision, not even a recommendation yet, but just noting that there's a whole bunch of grant deadlines right now that everybody's been really focused on. And when the air clears maybe a little bit from that, from this, you know, kind of current grant cycle deadlines, it'll be a great time to look and see what some options are for April. So that's as far as we've gotten, but I would agree that it would be great just to have the staff can just help us connect with each other about what those ideas are.
And I have a logistics question, but before I go there, Sheriff Johnson, I'm just curious. I know the Sheriff's Office often has opportunities for grant funds, and, you know, when you think about this question in general, do you have any thoughts about how that works within the realm that you play in?
To be honest, Robin, I still feel like I'm trying to get up to speed with what all of this really means. We do have a lot going on in the grant world, and right now is busy for us with other grants that we already participate in and other new funding. So, you know, I'm willing to look at taking on more before April 23rd. Certainly wouldn't have any opposition for me, but I'm not sure we will have our thoughts together wholly. I think for me, what might be helpful is getting with one of you that has participated in this council for since last year to help get me better up to speed on where we're going and what we're thinking, because I don't have a really firm sense of that yet.
And we're all still newbies, just to let you know. But I didn't mean to put you on the spot. And, you know, I don't know if this is a question for the board or for Kelly or Jim, when you think about logistics about, you know, is this something that would be on an ops board, a regular agenda item? Given that we just have one meeting before the April deadline. Maybe we'll have two, depending on when the April deadline lands. So just logistics in terms of where this conversation could happen.
Yeah, just so first thought that comes to mind for me is we could pull it forward in an operations group. I think because it is, you know, such a quick lead time again until April, the way I would potentially frame that conversation is to say, what are the known collaborations happening across the different municipalities in the region, just because there is such a strong emphasis on collaboration. And so, you know, looking at the opportunity to bring together or leverage cross municipality collaborations that are already happening might kind of narrow our conversation and make it more approachable for something that we could bring forward both to the operations group in March and then subsequently to the council. And I don't know, Jim, if you have other thoughts on that, the feasibility of that.
Yeah, I think maybe it's a both and, that there are ideas that get generated at the municipal level that perhaps could be surfaced and brought forward to the operations group for their consideration, as well as the operations board thinking about opportunities that they're seeing from a more regional approach to begin to wrestle with. So I think, to Elizabeth's point, I think we want to make sure that we're not tripping over each other, that we're not competing with each other, and that we're also thinking about, given the limits to these opportunities, how do we make the best of a funding cycle so that we're continuing to invest in the larger needs of the region.
Harold, I see your hand up.
Yeah, kind of what everyone's talking about. The other thing that I was thinking of with the clearinghouse too is one of the decisions that we're having to make on a regular basis is what's our staff capacity in order to work on these partnerships, and that is an issue that's really hitting us across the board right now. And so I think hearing a little bit about, maybe it's just a quick executive summary to see what folks are thinking, because you know what I could say is, even in my organization, I've seen folks come up with ideas that for whatever work we're doing that we just really can't support at that moment in time because of staff capacity and what we're trying to focus on. And I know that's been an ongoing challenge for us in terms of, well, can we do this, or can you be in this partnership? And the reality is we don't have the capacity to do that based on the core work that we have going on in our community. And I'm not sure if the operations group is bringing that type of lens to the conversation. And that maybe it be something that we need to talk about.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Jamie or Jack, I see you're still on the call. I'm curious if you have anything to offer in terms of, so let's say Longmont gets this first grant, and then would we be discouraged from applying again for another 5 years or so, or you just welcome them coming and then the state will decide?
Yeah, great question. There is an evaluation committee that will be reviewing all the applications. So I can't speak to specifically, you know, their determination on this grant, of course, but there is, if an entity does receive the funds, so if Longmont received it 1 year, then they do have a lower priority for the second year. I can't say that, like, if Longmont applies and receives it, then Boulder County would have a lower chance. So I do think they would be seen as two separate entities. But as Kelly mentioned, regional collaboration is definitely prioritized in the COAC's determination. So having, letters of support from the region to say that they supported an application makes it a stronger application. Also interregional. So if Region 6 was able to collaborate with another region, that's also encouraged. And then finally, for the infrastructure share, they are really looking at under-resourced communities, and that's how you determine it. So that would need to be part of the application. I think initially there was some discussion around whether that is rural, where places really just don't have, very many resources at all. And so that's one consideration too, as Boulder County is thinking through about how much time they invest in this application versus another one, because I think initially the COAC, while they're not limiting it to just rural entities, they did want to really see that they were under-resourced. And of course, you can make that argument, but I just wanted to put that out there. But I think there's a good idea to have this as a clearinghouse for applications. We'll have other ones coming out, like an innovation grant in the future. So if it's not the infrastructure grant, there's going to be other state grants, like an innovation grant. So this group could be a clearinghouse to make sure there is that regional partnership. And then my last note is that there will be more money coming to your region. So you could think about that too as a funding pool beyond these competitive infrastructure grants. That might even be a more useful area to think about, how you want to use your funds. Sorry for the long-winded response. Again, we are in the process of scoring and reviewing the applications by our evaluation committee, so I can't speak to any particular submission. But yeah, if Longmont did receive it, Boulder County as a separate entity would be able to apply the subsequent year or subsequent cycle.